Hey, Guy Powell here, and welcome to the next episode of the backstory on the Shroud of Turin. If you haven't already done so, please sign up for many other of these episodes and podcasts and posts on guypowell.com. As you know, I am the author of the book The Only Witness, which is a Christian historical fiction tracing a possible history of the Shroud of Turin over the last two millennia. What'll be fun about today's talk is we're going to talk about those 2,000 years and see how things and how impressions have changed. And Bob has got some interesting ideas on things, and I've got some others that I've done some research on, and we'll see what happens. So today we're talking with Bob Bird, and he is a outside of his other activities is his longtime researcher and speaker on the Shroud and a radio talk show host. And before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about him. So he's a conservative Alaskan educator, broadcaster, and political activist with a deep interest in faith and history. A longtime advocate of constitutional principles, he has also promoted the Shroud of Turin as a powerful witness to Christ's passion, and it blends his teaching with reflections on history, evidence, and belief. He has hosted an afternoon talk show, and it used to be called The Bird's Eye View, but it's now titled The Talk of Kenai, and that's on KSRM Radio 920 and also online at radiokenai.com. Bob, welcome. It's so good to have you.
And it was great to have you on my show last week. And thanks for, I'm very happy to return the favor.
Yeah, absolutely. It's wonderful to have you. I've really enjoyed our conversation and everything that we ended up talking about. And of course, the Shroud is my passion. It sounds like it's one of your passions. And how could we go wrong about talking about the Shroud? So first of all, let's find out what is your backstory on the Shroud of Turin? How did you get interested in it, and why it's so interesting for you?
Well, I grew up in Northern Illinois, and my dad got me and our family out of the heavy suburbs of Chicago. He was a farm equipment executive. And he moved us 70 miles out of Chicago so that he could commute every morning downtown. But we were living in Corn Belt country. And therefore, we had a Catholic church that was still it was a basement church at the time in the mid 50s. And I attended a Shroud lecture. I could not have been more than 7 years old. I may have been 6. I might even have been 5. I do remember this, that before they began the slide presentation, they took the Blessed Sacrament out, but took it very seriously. Not even a lecture on the Shroud was going to be done in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. So, and I remember, even at that age, of thinking, "Holy cow, this is a big deal." But in the years that followed, WGN every Good Friday had Father Francis Filas on for probably a 30-minute talk, and we never missed it. Okay, it was one of the things, part of our Good Friday devotions to make sure we watched that. And I don't know if there's any archives on it, but WGN carried it, and so that increased it. Then when I got into somewhere in high school, I read A Doctor at Calvary by Pierre Barbet, which still looks pretty good. I mean, it's not a dated book at all. And then here's what I was moved to Alaska in 1977. And I was teaching in the Aleutian Islands at the time that the Shroud Stirp was starting to be organized. And I got pretty excited about that. And then I got even more excited when its conclusions were published. And then when 1988 came and the carbon-14 dating came, I was very troubled over the fact that it took a lot longer for them to announce their findings than they expected. And then when they made that infamous press conference, I have to tell you, I had only one reaction. It was this: this doesn't make sense. And I knew it was flawed because you can't take all of the findings that the space age completely neutral scientists found in 1978 and cancel it out with carbon-14 dating. But the next 20 years, we saw all these different theories floated about, from bioplastic coating to contamination from the fire of 1532 or contamination by being held by many hands of bishops and outdoor expositions and so forth. And it wasn't until, thanks to 4 people, Joe Marino, Sue Benford, Barry Schwartz, and Ray Rogers, made that discovery. And you'll notice their press conference, I use it in my slide presentation. It didn't have the same gravitas that the carbon-14 1988 press conference had with that horrible shock, 1390 to 1260. I mean, that was a photo op that will last for ages, no matter what authenticity the Shroud is going to enjoy.
Let me interrupt you. What Barry Schwartz calls that picture is the Three Stooges.
We still can't agree on exactly how much culpability they have. I've read enough serious opinions that, the carbon-14 dating was spot on because it had mixed results with the mixture of the French reweaving cotton that was put in there. So you can't blame them for that. But we can blame them for not following their own protocols, which were violated 3 different locations, which they didn't do, and that they weren't going to share their findings until they were ready to conclusively make an independent, non-influenced conclusion. The one thing I'm going to excuse them for, and I don't know who's responsible for this, it may have been the Swiss textile expert. They probably reached for only one location because they didn't want to damage the shroud anymore. Mm. I wonder if, that's praiseworthy. And the 2 rectangular locations, I don't know if you've noticed this. The bigger one on what I call the far right, because I usually orient, that's the way I usually orient it. Mm-hmm. So at the top right, it's almost a perfect rectangle. And I saw that as a place where snipping had gone on for the sake of sharing relics. But others have a different opinion. But you'll notice that the place where they took the sample is not a perfect rectangle, and it tapers off, which indicates that it was repaired. And for some reason, maybe it was fraying badly there. And they figured, well, it's just going to keep unraveling unless we do something. So I think that might be the real cause behind the French reweaving repair, but we'll never know for sure.
Yeah. No, I think that's a reasonable conclusion. And I think you're right. The other section that was cut was probably cut for the dukes and the kings of Italy to provide and upgrade the different copies that were made for the other kings around the world and that wanted a copy of it so that they could say, hey, we've got a piece of the shroud and here's approximately what it looks like.
Yeah, that could well be. And of course, the other alternative theory is that strip was cut or torn by Joseph of Arimathea or Nicodemus and used it to cinch down the shroud, at the neck, ankles, waist, and so forth. And that they also used it for a chin bandage. And the reason why those segments are missing, so this theory goes, is because when they undid the chin bandage, somehow it got lost in the transfer of the body. And so that was not possible to reattach it. I'd be real. Nobody's done any speculation that I've been able to find as to when it was reattached. I don't even know if they've looked at the stitching to see if it matches stitching techniques from the medieval era or from the from ancient times.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be.
But it is important to note. I do believe that in the Gospel of John, it depends on translations, okay, but it talks about doesn't it mention winding sheet at one point in some of the translations? And so that would explain that, because a lot of skeptics say, well, you see, Jesus was wound up like an Egyptian mummy. Well, no. And so I really like the idea that it's John Jackson's speculation, as far
Yeah.
as I know, that it was torn to cinch down the shroud, perhaps in a continuous line. So
Yeah. Well, and plus, I don't know if you know this, but there's another piece of cloth in a cathedral in Bruges, and Pam Moon, who's another big researcher, her opinion is that that piece was used to tie the thumbs underneath so that it would keep the arms from falling off to the side.
in rigor
You know,
mortis.
in and out of rigor mortis there, that kept them in that pose, and so that may have been one of the pieces as well that was part of the strips of the linens lying there that John and Peter write about in their gospels.
It's great because the mysteries are endless, and it just keeps us going deeper and deeper to try to solve them out.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's funny, every once in a while I'll get a paper or an email that says, and here are all of here are what we believe are the uncontrovertible facts of the shroud. And the first one, is like, well, the cloth is made of linen. And that's really the only thing that you could probably say is uncontroversial. So, but anyway, let's talk about the timeline, and in particular, kind of the hidden years, which almost to some extent they start right after 33 AD, if that's what you believe is the date of resurrection, to all the way up to 1355 with the expositions, or the ostensions as they were called in Lire in France. And so let's talk about that. And I know we're going to stop off at probably the first one right away, which is, did the shroud get to Odessa? And I know we both have different opinions there, so very interested in going from there. So let's start.
Well, I go with Larry Stolle, and that is the shroud for the Gentiles, at least, was used as an evangelizing tool. And that's, to me, it's laughably obvious in Galatians chapter 3, verse 1. And I'm very interested in the various translations I see, because some of them say, you who saw Jesus clearly portrayed as crucified, and some of them say publicly portrayed as crucified. I'm not a scholar in Greek or Hebrew, so I don't know how it could possibly. Apparently, there's a word there that could be used from various angles. But the important thing is to note this: Christianity was not illegal if and when Paul took it to the Galatia, but it was when John wrote his gospel. So he would have been a little bit more reticent about describing the shroud in John 20. He would not have said, and we saw the image of Jesus miraculously portrayed on this cloth, you see. He wouldn't have done that, because there would have been an APB for the Romans to find it. And so he just put down, he saw and he believed. And I've seen some footnotes in Catholic Bibles that say there was something on the cloth that caused them to believe. I've actually seen that in one of the footnotes. So I would say that it was probably used in more than one location. Stolle goes with a lot more hints about the shroud being presented, and I leave that up to him, and he's going to give the presentation at the conference, which I want the people who are watching this. Yes, I'm going, and it's one of the rare times I won't get an award for having traveled the farthest distance from Alaska, because there'll be people there from all over the world. So I think we can safely say that the shroud, and I don't know if it's done by the Powell evidence, but some of them show it having been brought to Alexandria in Egypt, or maybe even Antioch, I don't know if you've got an opinion on that. And then, and I think, and I want to get to Athens after
Yeah.
the stack of Constantinople and the LaRoche family too. But what do you think about the shrouds? Where's the evidence that it went to Egypt? Do you have any of that?
Well, I don't have any evidence one way or another. The real question is whether the pollens were accurately mapped as to where they might have originated from, the ones that were found on on the shroud itself. And there's a couple of papers that are out there. Certainly, Max Fry is probably the most famous, and then there's another one by an
Avinoam
Avinoam,
Denim?
and
Avi,
and he's got a an interesting paper where he's mapped out 5 kilometer square parts of Israel, and then looked at what kind of pollens and plants and what have you were there. And so that one's kind of interesting. The challenge with the pollens, of course, is, is it possible that there were some plants that maybe went a little bit further? Because Alexandria isn't that far away from Palestine, the former Palestine. And so are all of those potentially the same or not? It's I'd like to hear more about Avinoam and understand a little bit about that. It would be interesting if you could somehow age genetically the pollen DNA and see if it had evolved over the last 2,000 years, and then you could say, well, maybe there's something in there like that. But all right, well, let's talk about, so what happened. So if Paul uh, somehow showed the shroud in Galatia. When one of the theories is that Peter had it, in Jerusalem certainly, and then maybe up to Antioch is kind of a little less certain. Maybe he went back and forth between. Well, he did go back and forth between Antioch and Jerusalem, and maybe he brought the shroud with him each time, and maybe at one time, he gave it to Paul, and Paul showed it to the Galatians, or in order for him to have written about it, or something like that.
or Thaddeus Jude took it to Odessa.
Yeah. So, but if Thaddeus Jude took it to Odessa, when do you think he took it to Odessa? And how does that then jive with the timing of Paul having written about it in his book of the Galatians?
I don't know enough about biblical scholarship to give you timelines. The earliest the earliest gospel was written by Matthew, and they basically figure what 15 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I go, and not everyone agrees with this either. That Christ's passion was in 30 A.D. I go with that, April 7th, 30 A.D. Others say 33 A.D. And that you'll have to talk to Dr. Baltz about. So the thing that I've kind of mishmashed in my own head is that the shroud was carefully used by all of the original 72 disciples. Paul would have it, Peter would have it, maybe Thaddeus Jude would have it. And, when I look at the artwork, that some of it's very recent, I love looking at it. And I'm glad there are people who are skilled trying to make sense out of it. One of the most beautiful ones shows Thaddeus Jude holding almost a transparent cloth that's shimmering, and Abgar's looking at it. Another one is very primitive. I don't know when it was done. It was probably on the walls somewhere in the 500s or 600s, where they show, again, just the portrait of the face to Abgar. But I think Ian Wilson probably said that they had folded it, doubled it in four, so that just the face was visible, which of course created then the Veronica legend. But then again, Paul Badi, I don't know how he pronounces his last name, that great German Catholic journalist, has his own theories about the Manipello cloth and all that sort of stuff. Every one of them is worthy of discussion. And it's maybe, we'll have a campfire circle at the at the International Shroud Symposium, and everybody's going to get their points in at a place where we're all able to interact with each other. I don't know. So I can't give you a timeline, but I've seen, I think it's reasonable to assume if Christ exchanged letters with Abgar, and that's plausible,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Or he may have simply sent word back. But Thaddeus Jude wouldn't have wasted much time, because if you're going to cure somebody of leprosy, you better get moving. And if Peter saw something on the shroud, as did John, they might have said, and Thaddeus Jude is considered to be a cousin of Jesus, I believe. Thaddeus, get up there to King Abgar right away, and then come back with the shroud. That's what I play around with my own mind. And
Yeah.
then,
Okay.
and yeah.
Yeah, well, let me just back up a second. And for the audience, there's a thing called the what's kind of commonly talked about, which is like the legend of the image of Odessa. And legend kind of means that it's a story. Sometimes, and most of the time, legends are based on facts. So it could be factual, it might not be factual. And the legend, as I'm going to use that term, is that Thaddeus, at Thomas's bidding, so the one of the 12, whereas Jude Thaddeus was probably one of the 72, where Thomas was kind of given the mandate to go off and evangelize in Mesopotamia and northern Syria and some of Persia and some of that area there. And Odessa, which is what we're talking about, is in the middle of that area. It's actually very close to Haran, where Lot was, where Isaac met Rebekah, and there's a whole bunch of other Old Testament activities that took place very close to Odessa. And so the legend goes that this King Apgar, while Jesus was alive, sent a letter to Jesus, and it was transmitted by an individual, most likely someone in his court, most likely by, and all of the writings are by this gentleman, Hanan. And so he reads the letter to Jesus. Jesus then responds to that letter and says, I'm sorry, I can't come to you, but after my mission is complete and after I die, I will send someone to you to cure you. And so then Hanan takes this message back, whether it was actually written by Jesus or whether it was transcribed by this gentleman, Hanan. Nobody knows. Some people believe it was a true writing of Jesus, and others kind of think otherwise. And so that's kind of what we're talking about. And then the next piece of it is, did Thaddeus take an image with him of Jesus, which was part of one of the requests by Apgar to Hanan? Did he take an image with him of Jesus? Was it painted? Was it the shroud? Was it another sweat cloth? Or something else? And so that's kind of where all the controversy comes from. So that's the
Yeah,
background here of what's going on.
if Paul Batty is correct that there was a Besis cloth with Jesus's image on it, he might have just used that. It would have been a lot easier to carry. But then, how did the shroud get to Odessa? Which I want to hear why you don't think it did, despite the story of the repair of the walls and the flood. But the legend continues that after Abgar converted to Christianity, obviously was baptized then, and he would be the first Christian king before
Yeah.
Constantine by centuries. Okay, and but it might have been just skin deep, and it's really tough to shake centuries of paganism. And the son of Abgar, I think he's Abgar the second. No, Manu. That's what
Manu.
his name.
Yep.
Manu. Yeah, he reverted to paganism, and the Christians were persecuted. And the legend says they hid it. So, but the legend also says no one ever forgot about it. So, tell me what you think happened with the shroud and why it didn't go to Odessa. I'm just
Yeah.
intrigued about this. Yeah.
Well, I don't know where it went. I think Jack Marquardt writes that it was in Antioch. And what's interesting is that there are several contradictory writings, and as I said on your show, there's absolutely nothing contradictory and controversial with the Shroud. It's everything is contradictory and controversial. So there are, and this is one of the papers that I'll be presenting at the Shroud conference coming up in St. Louis, which, by the way, you can find out more information at shroud2025conference.com. And so there's a writer, Labubna. He was part of one of the of Apgar's courts, and he wrote about the this whole thing. And he only writes about the letter. He does not mention an image, which is pretty critical. Now, fast forward another 100 or so years to a guy named Bardesanis. He writes about the hymn of the pearl. The hymn of the pearl. Now, Bardesanis was also most likely in Apgar the Eighth's court. So 3 Apgars later, after Apgar the Fifth, is the one we're talking about. And he writes about an image that's my full size and looks like a reflection of me. That's the hymn of the pearl, and that was roughly 195 AD. And then there's another writer. It slips my mind at the moment. But then the most important one, or probably the most important one, is then Eusebius of Caesarea. He was the bishop of Caesarea, and he wrote what's called the Ecclesiastical History. And in there, he does not mention the image. He only mentions the letter. And he was generally thought of as being a pretty good writer and pretty accurate writer, writing his
Is this?
history.
There's a lot of Eusebiuses. Is this the one that was in the late Roman Empire, or even
Well, it would have been in the 300s, so it would have
300s?
been,
Okay,
yeah, I
after
can't remember.
Constantine's
I think it
conversion.
was after
Yeah,
Constantine, but it might have
yeah.
been anyway. It was definitely after Constantine, as I recall. And actually, I'll add that fact to my writing here. But the interesting part about it is, so Bardesanis in 195 mentions an image, the shroud image. So how did he see that? Given that the shroud may have been in Antioch or may have been in Odessa. So if it was in Odessa, then he saw it. It was right there. He saw it. It was in the archives. So a lot of controversy. Now, Marquardt thinks that the shroud was brought by Bishop Aversius out of Hierapolis to the conversion of Apgar the Eighth, and he wanted to then, because this was the first kingdom that was now going to convert entirely, blah blah blah, and so it's possible that it was brought there from Antioch to this conversion. So that's where you can see that the controversy or the difference of opinion. And the good news is there is no 100% accuracy. Nobody can say that this absolutely happened. I think for me, absolutely, Christ died, he was resurrected, he's there for us, etc. But after that, it's really hard to come up with something.
Have you seen? I don't want to call them cartoons, but it's written in Greek, and it's commemorating General Kourkouris. I hope I pronounced that properly. The one who besieged Odessa, 944. And he's being presented the shroud with courtiers. Have you seen this one?
That
And
is the
He's kissing the face of Jesus, which is portrayed as having actually been lifted out of the cloth. You've seen that.
Yeah, that's as an aside, that's what's commonly known as the skylitzes. There's a copy of these skylitzes or skylitzes in Madrid. They were written about 1090 or so, and they are illuminated, which means that there's images in there, which is what you're talking about.
But
And
that's a
I am going to, during the conference, I am going to talk about exactly that image, and you will
okay.
be very surprised as to what you see on there. So
Okay,
anyway,
because it's definitely portrayed as a shroud that's folded out. Okay. But the face of Jesus is being portrayed as having been lifted out of it. And so you know what the general is kissing. And I'd say after a year's siege and all the things that a siege of a city entails, there's a great, after the negotiations are finally completed and Odessa is never again going to be attacked, they're
Yeah.
happy on the inside and they're happy on the outside. And we know there was a great parade when they brought it back. So that's a shroud they're holding, not a mandilion, not a towel. So I'll wait for your explanation, maybe in St. Louis.
Well, and I'm not gonna give it away, but
Okay.
I'm gonna totally disagree with that. But
All
let's
right.
go on to another topic, and that is in 944, which is when Corchorus, General Corchorus, he basically invaded and was outside the walls of Edessa, and he was more or less negotiating to get the image, what was then known as the image of Edessa, and get possession of it and take it back to Constantinople and for Romanus Lecapenus, and he was able to do that. He traded prisoners, Muslim prisoners, who was Muslim at the time, and he traded gold and silver and other valuables for this cloth. He takes it back. It comes back to Constantinople. And there's two writers that are really critical to this period. One of them is Constantine. He's Constantine the Seventh, I think, and the other one is what's called Gregory Referendarius. And Gregory Referendarius gives a sermon, and he gives it on the day after the cloth. Call it just the cloth at the moment. The day after the cloth arrives in Constantinople, and he references the shroud or the cloth with blood from the side of Jesus. And then he references something with a face image on it. And so when one of the things that he says is, and here is a cloth with the blood from Jesus on it, blood from the side, and there is a cloth with an image of the face on it.
So he
And
speaks of
that
two separate cloths.
Well, and that right there is one of the other incredibly controversial
Mysteries.
writings. So, and so Bob, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but, many people take that as meaning the shroud and the image of Edessa were one and the same. And then the recent translation of that done by Mark Guskin is that his opinion, and Nicolati as well, and Andrea Nicolati, who's a historian, he says, and the shroud over there and the image of Edessa over here. So he's kind of translating it.
I thought Guskin was the expert on the Sudarium, but
No,
and
that's yeah. That would be Caesar Barta. Guskin wrote a book called "The Legend of the Image of Edessa," and
okay.
yeah. So anyway, that's one of the writers, and we can argue about that forever. So we're not going to do that. But the other writer that's also very interesting at that time is Constantine the Seventh, and he writes what's called the Narratio de Edessina, so the history or the narration of Edessa, and he writes about the cloth that was received. And he says that, and this is at exactly the same time as the sermon from this Gregory Referendarius. And he writes, we received a cloth that was nailed to a board and covered in gold and encrusted with jewels. And if that's true, and who's to say which one is true or false? And if he was the emperor, then maybe that's true, or maybe he was trying to bias whatever he was writing. But if that's true, if it was folded up in, as you said, in four and then doubled in two, and if it was nailed to a board such that only the face was showing, then one of the arguments back to you would be, where are the nail marks in the shroud cloth to replicate that nailing of the cloth to the board.
Yeah, I've never heard of that, so I wouldn't be
Yeah,
looking
yeah,
for nail marks.
yeah.
However,
So go ahead, please.
well, it might explain the missing pieces from the strip. Maybe that they were there.
Yeah,
You
that
know,
could be.
in the two
Could be.
corners. But you said
Could be that
you're
they
going
were
to
cut
open
off on
up
the
an
sides.
endless
Yeah.
discussion.
And that is why it's so much fun to talk about the shroud because, like I said, there's absolutely nothing controversial. It's everything is controversial.
Yeah, right. And the thing to keep in mind is, I know that amongst Shroud devotees, as Barry Schwartz told me, there are camps that are not talking to each other, and that's not going to happen to me. I'm too open minded, and I've learned as an historian, I've got to rewrite a lot of stuff, and I won't go into where in American history or world history, but I know, yeah, we there's apparent history and then there's real history. And so if somebody comes up with something I've never heard of before, I'm not going to say, get out, I've made up my mind. No, I'm going to simply say, okay, I'm listening. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
the,
there's three kinds of histories or three kinds of truths. One of those is my truth. One of those is your truth, and one of them is the truth.
and sometimes all three agree, but
Yeah.
so
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 anyway, we're
you
going to have some fun in St. Louis for the audience. So we're going to be together there. I'm going to be presenting on this, and so I've actually been spending the last year or so researching all of this, and that's why it's very top of mind for me, and that's why I love
uh,
talking about it.
let's go with the Knights Templar thing
Yeah.
because I recently read. I I can't tell you, why it took me this long to read it, but the LaRoche family, which were in the Templars, and they apparently had, at the height of their power, Athens as a Crusader state, and that they had the shroud making its way to Western Europe with a stopover for some decades in Athens. And one of the really wonderful, there's a stained glass window somewhere in France that shows the Count of La Roche holding the shroud. Have you seen that? I'm sure you have.
That I have not seen. I will definitely look that one up. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I use it in one of my PowerPoint slides. And so that indicates that the conjecture, that's what we'll call it, that there was that the shroud, boy, I cringe when I think they took it on a ship. Okay. It's got to be vulnerable
Yep.
every step of the way. How often have people tried to destroy that shroud? I'm gonna make it. No one's ever said this, and there's no evidence. But maybe the Chambéry fire was done by Huguenots who were Calvinists, and Calvin had a low opinion of the shroud. He knew about it, and but we certainly know that there was a Molotov cocktail dropped on the shroud in 1972, and it just flamed out on the altar cloths. And then, of course, the 1997 fire, which is certifiable as having been arson.
Mm.
And I think that I wish Mara Tromatori was at the conference. That is such, I get
Good point.
goosebumps every
Yeah.
time I hear that story. That I felt like I was carrying a baby boy on my shoulders, and there were thousands of people waiting outside behind the police lines, behind the lines that were as the St. John the Baptist Cathedral was burning. And when the shroud came out, I had the same relief when the Notre
Yeah.
Dame Cathedral burned, that they'd saved the crown of thorns. Boy, oh boy, what a
Yeah.
thing that Trematore did, huh? That
Yeah, you
is,
weren't kidding. I write about that in my book. That's one of my, so in my book, I have 13 short stories, and one of those is about Trematore, and one of those as well is about Othon de la Roche. But let me back up for the audience. And so the history, or a history, which is more important. So in 1204 was what's called the Fourth Crusade. And there was a lot of controversy going on between the emperor at the time, one of the Alexiuses, and paying off the Crusaders to go down to Jerusalem and free Jerusalem. And finally, the Crusaders basically invaded Constantinople and stole, or took possession of, some people might say, but stole many artifacts and relics. And one of those is most likely was the shroud, as at least one of the histories could be. And that history is that Othon de la Roche, who was one of the top leaders in the Crusades, he then took it to Athens, and as part of the settlement of the battle, or the Fourth Crusade, was that Athens would now be owned, so to speak, by the Latins, so that Europe, the Catholic Athens, the Catholic Europeans. And so Othon de la Roche was made the Duke of Athens. And so one story is that he's the one that took the shroud from Constantinople over to Athens, and that's what we're talking about. And one of his later progeny is Marguerite de Charny, and then there's Geoffrey de Charny, and it's most likely the case that Geoffrey de Charny was either gifted it or gifted it to this church in Lille, France, and we'll talk about that as well. But in any case, that's where kind of this story of Othon de la Roche comes
It also
into the
brings us
history.
to, we've also skipped over late in the Shroud's history in Constantinople when the Hungarian Prey manuscript, the oldest known artifact written in the Hungarian language, so I'm told, so it rates up there with Dante, who wrote in Italian and not in Latin. And I'm trying to think who else. Luther's translation of the Bible into German, I think, was also considered one of the very first German language writings.
Yeah, yeah,
So, so the Hungarian Prey manuscript shows it's unquestionably the shroud because the L holes are there. And when we talk about fires in the shroud, nobody knows when or how those L holes came on the shroud, but they're certainly there in 1193, and they were certainly there in the early 1500s when some of the copies of the shroud clearly show the L holes. I go with the dripping torch theory because there's too many little residual burn marks around those two very delineated L holes. And we have no idea when the shroud was taken out of, let's say, a very dark crypt, and they needed to have torches, and somebody had the tar burned through it, and by the time they withdrew the torch, it was in the configuration of an L. It's been speculated that they were trial by ordeal. Can you imagine any Christian wanting to put poker holes through the shroud? No, I can't do that. No. And it's possible it was a thurifer. Somebody got careless with the coals.
mm,
So I'd like to hear your thoughts, but there's nobody that's got, I think the earliest recognition of the L holes is the Prey manuscript.
yeah.
There's no reference anywhere earlier than that, is there?
No, that's right. And so the L holes are four holes that were clearly burned into multiple folds of the shroud. So the shroud was folded up, and there's four holes in the shape of an L. And the Prey manuscript, which Bob is talking about, was written by Prey is the name. The guy, his name is Prey. It's not a prayer manuscript. It's the Prey manuscript. And it's an illuminated manuscript. And again, it means it has a picture in it. And the picture shows Jesus Christ, and it shows him with his hands crossed and a couple of other things that were recognizable from the shroud. And then it also shows then what could be interpreted as a herringbone weave. So the linen is a 3/1 herringbone weave, and this one of the images has that. And then lastly, that image has blood on it, or what appears to be painted blood, or whatever. and then it has these L holes in it, and that's dated to roughly 1197, as I recall. Definitely the 1190s. So sometime as a relatively good proof that the shroud existed, even before the Fourth Crusade.
Right. And then that gives us what the question: if what they stole, they didn't steal it. It was an honest military campaign. It was conquest. Okay, unlike what the Templars did. I don't think you can call that an honest conquest because they were all excommunicated. And by the way, I want to add this caveat that Venice, I think, owns part of the culpability because the Crusaders knew that the Venetians had the finest navy and they wanted to get to the Holy Land, but they didn't have the money. And so basically, Venice said, and correct me if I'm wrong, Constantinople is in debt to us. Help us collect the debt, and then we'll get you to the Holy Land. Well, it didn't work out that way.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. There was a lot of money going on, and it was Venice that had the shipping because that was a big center of trade and had a navy and was able to transport people and what have you from Europe, then be brought down to they were going to stop off outside of Constantinople, and then they were going to move on down to Jerusalem and as part of the Fourth Crusade. And so but one of the things though that's interesting to bring up is, and one of the challenges is that after 1204 the Pope, and I can't remember which one it is, Honorius possibly, he basically gave an edict. He says anyone that has a relic from Constantinople, it will be excommunicated. And so, if Othon de la Roche had the shroud, then he could be potentially excommunicated, and excommunication is a disaster for anyone at that time because Catholicism in the West was just, if you weren't communicated, then you were persona non grata. So he had to keep it secret, and that's one of the challenges for us as historians is that the proof then is not there directly because of this edict from the Pope at the time.
right. By the way, I've given this talk to 3 times to an Orthodox uh, audience, and they have replicas of the shroud that they take out every what they call Great Friday, not Good Friday, and because the memory of it being part of Eastern Christianity's uh, possession has not been forgotten. And I have to make certain admissions. Yes, the Crusaders stole it; they're to blame. But you know, God makes good come out of evil, and we can only imagine where the shroud would be had it still been in Constantinople when it fell to the Turks in 1453, because they weren't taking any prisoners.
Yeah, and they would destroy potentially. Now that's one of the things as well with Odessa. Our conversation in the 640s, I think it was, the Muslims conquered Persia, and then and Edessa was part of Persia, so they conquered Edessa, and yet the image of Edessa was in Edessa at that time. So now the Muslims have possession of this important relic. One thing that's kind of interesting that not sure you're aware of, we I wrote to. I don't know. It was on one of the email train chains that I'm on or whatever, and we were writing to one of the Orthodox groups, and I can't remember which one it was. And they basically about the Shroud of Turin, and they basically said, "Ah, the shroud, that's a Catholic thing. We're not interested, and our interest is in the image of Edessa, and we venerate the image of Edessa." And so it's kind of even after the great schism between the East and the West that they have their cloth, so to speak, the image of Edessa, and we have ours, so to speak, which is the Catholic and the Shroud of Turin.
Well, where is it then?
Where is the image of Edessa today?
If they think that they're two different artifacts, where is it?
Well, my study. is that the image of Edessa went from Edessa in 944 to what we talked about with Constantine the Seventh and Gregory Referendarius. It stayed there. It was hidden away because people were afraid of it because there was miraculous things going on with it, or believed to have been. And then in 1204, the Fourth Crusade, it survived the Fourth Crusade. And then in 1207 to 1237, I think it was 1235 maybe, Baldwin II, who was now the new emperor of the Latin Constantinople, so the Europeanized Constantinople. Because of the Fourth Crusade, he had no money. He needed money. So he sold 21 relics to King Louis the Ninth, I believe it was, in Paris.
St.
And
Louis.
St. Louis. And
Yeah.
so then those relics then were now transported to Paris, and King Louis then built the Sainte-Chapelle Cathedral, and he had the Grand Chasse built, and it was all of these relics were stored in there. And one of the items in the transport and in all of the later inventories that were done references an item called the Mandylion. And so, if the Mandylion was in Constantinople and survived the Fourth Crusade, then it was then most likely sold to the French during that time, and then it was clearly inventoried over 200 years, no, 1300, 1200, 1300, so that's 700 years. I'm not even getting the math right, till 1793. And guess what happened in 1793 in France?
Yeah, we all know that. They destroyed a lot of relics.
And
Yeah.
the all of those relics were stolen, melted down, or destroyed. And so the Mandylion, what's now called the Mandylion, formerly known as the image of Edessa, was disappeared and most likely destroyed during the French Revolution. And so it's gone. It's gone. There's
So this
unfortunately that
leads
version
me
of it.
this leads me to the Manapella cloth, because in 1404 there was a beautiful painting that shows a medieval woman. She's in medieval garb, but she's supposed to be Veronica, and so it's one of those paintings where the artist is not attempting to show Veronica as she would have looked on the streets of Jerusalem. She's showing her like she was, from the time of Joan of Arc. It was 1404, but it shows a totally transparent cloth, which is exactly what we've got in Manapello. But Barry Schwartz, I was always troubled about the Manapello cloth, and I was enthused at the same time. I said, I don't like the way the lips and the teeth are. I don't like that. It looks like a rather amateurish job there. And then Barry said, well, Bob, look at the eyebrows. They're combed in reverse. And not that they were combed, they were growing in reverse. It's impossible to have eyebrows, slanting the wrong way. And that's exactly, I was right inches from it. You've been there, I guess. I don't know if you were looking for it.
No, I haven't seen
But
it yet.
you don't need to go to Manapella, because you can get any camera right up next to it and take a very good detailed picture right through the bulletproof glass. So but Paul Batty, and I hope, again, with apologies to him, I don't know the German pronunciation, Badde, if it's just bad or body, I don't know. He's a very good Catholic journalist. He theorized that this byssus cloth was laid over the face of Jesus above the shroud, and that he passed through it with his eyes open. That could be referenced in John 20. It could be the whole story of Thaddeus Jude and King Abgar. It could be then the Holy Mandylion. But what we're looking at in Manapello is a copy, a very good copy. And it's not a copy. This is my theory. It's not a copy that was probably done to try to fool people. It was because I think most, like, you look at the Shroud copies, Don't ever tell me somebody was trying to pass that off as the real burial cloth. Even the greatest artists in the world can't do it. So Albert Dürer, his version of it is lousy. So I think most of these copies were done because most people aren't going to be able to ever see it. I want to see pretty much what it looks like. And that's the story with the copy in New Jersey, which itself is a second-class relic. And it's quite miraculous with the blood stain there. So I think what we're looking at in Manipello is a copy. And I don't think the Capuchin monks, who are the custodians, want to have a scientific test, non-destructive, all right, because it would diminish the pilgrimage site, So
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
they're very clever about that. So
Well, and one of the
that's
things
my
with
theory. I'd like to hear yours. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things with these pilgrimage sites is that you make money. Maybe not the church anymore, but certainly all of the tourist shops and whatever. And so they want to have it as being, absolutely true. And that's actually one of the challenges with the shroud is if you really had a another test where you could be very confident that the results would be true, and then you go off and you test the shroud again, and you get a date that is not from the first century, but is maybe from some different time, other than the carbon 14 dating. That that could be that'll be a challenge, another challenge for the us shroudists and authenticists,
well,
to
I
work
want to
through.
talk about the 2002 restoration because
Yeah,
frankly, I don't blame them a bit because if they had announced it to all the great Shroud devotees, there would have been whoa, you got to think about this and think about that. And I don't think they did a good job. I think Barry Schwartz was correct.
yeah.
But I think it was done, and no one's written it. It's just my own speculation. I think it was done with this attitude. Look, science has had a crack at it, and the Stirp pretty much confirmed it's authentic. But we're not going to have endless redoings of destructions of the shroud. And I think that's one of the reasons why they vacuumed it, because how many proofs do you want? There was a group of evangelicals decades ago said that the odds that this is not the shroud is like 800 million to 1.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, and that was a conservative estimate.
Well, that
So,
vacuuming and that 2002 restoration, basically a relic should never be restored. I mean, on the shroud side, it's just the shroud scientists, they're just like livid. Bill Meacham, who's been involved in the shroud for many decades, he wrote a book. It's called The Rape of the Shroud, and it is specifically about all of the information that was lost during this pseudo restoration where they vacuumed the shroud and removed pollen and dust off of it and dirt and grime. They chopped away I think they even did it to those four poker holes, the Prey manuscript holes that we talked about, the L holes. They chopped away and took away all of the charcoal around them. They took the repairs that were done after the Chambéry fire and they removed them. So now there's just a big hole there.
they've saved them. They've saved them. But when you talk about the dust being vacuumed, you'll never know exactly what location it came from. And that's
Well,
really
they
important.
claim that they've done something like that, but nevertheless, I mean, if they vacuumed, let's say, the whole face and didn't differentiate the dust that was on the nose from Jesus Christ falling on his nose versus his cheeks, then that's information that's lost. And so vacuuming it was a what a big mistake. Not to mention the fact it may have stretched the shroud. When you vacuum something, it kind of gets sucked up, and I don't know. I I don't know what they used on
What's
there, but
what's the new backing cloth? Barry was very concerned how it might react to the linen. Is it
I
silk?
I don't know. I don't know if they actually put a backing cloth on it.
Yeah, there's a
I
new
don't.
backing cloth. They put a
Is
new
there?
backing
Okay.
cloth.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So they
one of the
still have the
reasons why
old one.
you can tell that because the old backing cloth is yellowed, and you can see that at the rectangles in
Yeah.
the corners. Okay, but when they removed the Reyes fragment, which was in 1972, voila, it was whiter than the exposed parts of the backing cloth. But now, when you look at, and I was there in 2010 with the new backing cloth, you're looking straight through the triangular holes, and it is
Yeah.
very white. It's very, very white. So,
Okay, so you have seen it. Yeah, I didn't realize.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic. So now, just for everyone, the shroud is stored in an argon neutral or whatever it is, huge long case, and so that hopefully that will minimize and hopefully remove any possible decay that might take place on the shroud.
And
What
it'll never be rolled up or folded again either.
Yeah, and it'll never be held up as well because now with those repairs removed, it's now a lot more fragile overall. So it's going to always be laid out. And what I understand, hopefully they'll have another exhibition of it, and they're going to have a big mirror over it, so that you'll be able to be standing this way, and you'll be looking into a mirror that's above the shroud, and then the shroud will be, will still be laid out without being disturbed mechanically so that it'll
Well, I
be,
was disturbed when they specifically asked, and they do the same thing in the Sistine Chapel, no flash photography. And there was flash photography going on while I was in that cathedral in 2010. They were random, okay?
yeah,
I didn't
yeah,
even want to risk it with my own little camera because I never know when it's automatically going to give me a flash. So I just said, I've got enough. I just want to see it. I don't need to take my
yeah,
own picture
yeah,
of it.
yeah,
So,
yeah. The first
oof.
time I saw a copy of the Shroud was in the Museum of the Bible, and it was laid out, the 14 feet by 3 feet, and it was a copy. It was a copy that was a very special copy. It was supposedly made by seeds that have been were linen seeds that were from 2,000 years ago, and so and then they were mechanically treated exactly the way they would be. The linen was mechanically treated exactly the way his ancient weavers would have done, and then they wove it in this 3/1 herringbone, and then this thing was the image was printed on it. And I remember looking at that, and it is so impressing of an image. It's not It is impressive, but it has such an impression on you that it's just an emotional
Well, that
thing
is
to be able to
amazing. I
watch that.
haven't heard. I haven't heard that they had gone to that kind of a length. Could this be what I sent to you on the email of what the undamaged shroud would look like?
I don't know. I don't remember that, but they did they made 7 copies using this method, and a very detailed method. They made 7 copies, and those are scattered around. And one of those is one of the ones that was in the Museum of the Bible on exhibition, and now it's held by the Museum of the Bible, but it's you know somewhere behind the scenes, so you can't see it, unfortunately.
I sent an email to Giulio Fanti in Italian and asked him about the the image, which I'll explain to those who are going to be watching this. I found in about a 6-page large fold out coffee table booklet. It wasn't a hardbound coffee table book. It was a glossy booklet. And I folded it out, and I think it was in Italian. I've lost the booklet. It was 30 years ago when I saw it. And with the fold out, it showed you what the shroud might have looked like through artificial intelligence. They extrapolated maybe where the shoulders would be and other parts. So there's no
Oh yeah,
distracting
yeah, yeah.
burn marks. Okay. And I don't know who did that, but I have speculated if I could get permission, I would try to make my own traveling copy as to, hey, this is how it looked when Peter got to the tomb. I mean, and probably the image is far more obvious than it is now, and it was also shown that way. So maybe I'll come across somebody in the St. Louis symposium who says, "Oh yeah, I know who did that." I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, that
It's a
would be
mystery.
very interesting. Yeah. It would be very interesting to see what that actually looked like because it right now for the audience there are these burn holes from the Chambéry fire in the 16th century, and unfortunately the shoulders and the sides are kind of a little bit they're gone, and so unfortunately you can't see whether the shoulders are there and what they might have looked like, and what maybe some of the whip marks that might have been on there, and other things related to the shoulders.
So I don't know how long you want to go here, but
Yeah, we've got a break off here, but this has been great, Bob. It's so much fun to go back and forth, and I am definitely going to be very interested in your reaction after you've been part of my presentation on the what's called the Mandylion or the image of Odessa. I've been, there's two camps in the shroud world. There's the Mandylion and the shroud are one and the same. And then there's the other camp that says, no, 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 they're totally different cloths. And so hopefully at the end of my presentation, I will have convinced a couple of people, and hopefully you'll be convinced as well. So,
I can guarantee you that I will listen with lots of questions, and I'll find it fascinating. And we'll just have I may have to readjust my own thoughts. I've already had to change my PowerPoint presentation about the Manipello cloth, and
yeah,
so I don't have any problem with that. I'm looking for the truth, and there's a lot of avenues. I guess it's literally a murder mystery where the investigator has to have 100 different theories, and he has to have probably 20 suspects, of which 19 are perfectly innocent, and you take it from there. So 100
yeah.
years from now, we won't be around to find out what they're saying about it.
Well, and the funny part is, and 100 years later, there'll be something else they'll be saying about it as the knowledge evolves. So, Bob, thank you so much. I really appreciate it today. This has been wonderful. It's so great to go back and forth on different things and hear different opinions, and be able to then discuss the history in a hopefully in an interesting format for the audience. So for the audience, definitely stay tuned for many other videos in this series of the backstory on the Shroud of Turin. And you can find out more information on these and other locations at guypowell.com. And also, if you're interested, my book is a Christian historical fiction and on the Shroud of Turin, and it's a historical fiction. It's not the historical fiction because nobody knows exactly what it was. Bob, any last words?
Last word is they can find me on shroud.com as one of the Shroud presenters, and I'm very affordable. I often don't charge a penny. Simply because if I'm going on vacation somewhere, I'm going to bring the shroud with me, and then I've arranged ahead of time. Hey, there's a church that's interested. Yeah, bring it. So I mean, you never know how that works, and so they can contact me by going to shroud.com. All right,
Wonderful.
thank you, Guy. It's been wonderful, absolutely. And I'll say
Yeah,
goodbye
thank
right
you.
here.
Yep,
All right,
absolutely. Thank you, Bob, and we'll be talking at some point, definitely in St.
I'll
Louis.
see you in a week. Okay.
Yep.